Welcome back. It's Intro to Physical Anthropology. I'm David Leitner. I'm your instructor. Today, we are going to talk about primate behavior, a little bit about how we study it, and then I want to get into the issue of what makes primates social. Why are we social creatures to begin with? And how does that have advantages for us in evolution? How does that even evolve? Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So there are three main strategies for studying primate behavior. And the emphasis on any one of these, all three are used today, but the emphasis has really changed over the years. Early on in primatology, the first one here, captive study, was the main form of study. Now, this was a time when we really didn't think animals, we sort of thought of animals almost as like automatons, as not really robots, but very simple. That, you didn't really have to think in too complicated a way about their environment affecting their behavior. They would run on instinct, and instinct would drive everything. So you didn't really need to worry about that. And so captive studies were really sort of the main way to do it. And also because other kinds of studies, like going out and going where the primates are, was extremely expensive. It still is. Captive studies have some advantages still, even though we don't really do it as much now. It is a highly unnatural environment, and so some of the behaviors you observe are actually only unique to the captive environment. You will not see those behaviors out in nature. However, there are other reasons you might do a captive study. If as a control, say you're trying to teach a primate sign language, which is something that has happened, you'll find out that there's a controversial sort of history of this research itself. And there are some videos on the Canvas site that will go into that, if you're interested. But you really need to have access to the organism pretty much all the time. It takes a lot of close-up interaction, and you need to be able to also sort of offer prizes, rewards for getting things right. So a captive study is a much better model for doing something like that than, say, some of the others that I'll talk about. That said, there's a lot more emphasis nowadays on the ethics of keeping primates in captivity. Protocols for keeping captive primates have changed significantly. And using primates for biomedical research is now finally becoming not just discouraged, it's becoming really quite unpopular and considered fairly unethical. As you'll find out, primates are not so unlike us in that if you deprive them of a rich environment, a stimulating environment, they will develop severe mental health issues. If you try to raise them in isolation among humans, they will develop identity issues. It is not healthy for them. So a lot of care is taken to provide stimulating environments, to change up their routines, to do as much as you can to simulate the kinds of things they'll come across in their own environment, but also introduce other kinds of novelties. You can see this gorilla here has been given some paper chains, an unusual object that's full of bright, vibrant colors, textures, shapes, that, although it in of itself doesn't seem like a big deal, introducing surprises like this from time to time is very healthy, not just for a gorilla, but for us as well. Think about your own life. How often do you need a little bit of change? So, that's just a few sort of last comments on that. So our approach to the ethics of captive study has really changed. Semi-free ranging environments are another way of studying primates. In these studies, you don't keep them in cages, but rather you try and keep them in a self-contained environment, usually islands. Most primates are hydrophobic. They don't want to cross water. And for good reason, because in a lot of their environments, there are dangerous things in the water, right? And they're not very good swimmers, most of them. So, placing them on an island gives them a sort of natural sort of boundary to where they can go, but you otherwise leave the island in a relatively wild state, so that you try to remove the predators that might prey on them, because you've invested a lot into this project. You don't want them to all get eaten, but it allows them to be observed when they want to be observed and not be observed when they don't want to be observed. It also allows them to form more natural groupings, engage in more natural mating behavior, foraging behavior that's a little more natural. Now, it's a compromise, though, because this isn't usually their actual natural environment. These are images from a research station in that's run by the School of Tropical Medicine in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and it is an island in the Caribbean. They are studying rhesus monkeys here. These rhesus monkeys are not native to that area. They're actually from Asia, and they were imported here in the 1930s as a colony and have been maintained ever since. So, on the one hand, we're getting sort of natural behaviors, but we're getting natural behaviors in an unnatural environment, if that makes sense. So it's a good compromise, though, for lots of things, because there's some things that may not be so different and so impacted by that. And it allows for more intense observation by scientists, and more reliable sort of conditioning of the troop to the scientist's presence as well. The final and sort of gold standard primatology research today, especially if you're going for behavioral research, is the field study. This is taking the cues from cultural anthropology, really, and saying we have to visit the primates where they are. We have to live next to them. We have to try and be present and engaged in the activities that they do when we can, get them used to our presence, and get to know them on an individual basis. They are individuals. That's the thing. They have personalities, just like we do. And, without over-anthropomorphizing them, I have to be careful there. We don't want to romanticize it, but these are incredibly complex creatures. Our personalities didn't develop out of thin air. They are an extension of an evolutionary trait that has come up through primates, possibly other intelligent animals as well, but we know definitely through primates. So this is the most ethical. Primates can be observed if they want to, not be observed if they don't want to. They can react to their own natural behaviors, the ones they have, not only the ones they have evolved in terms of instincts, but also the ones that they have learned generation after generation after generation within that troop, in that environment. It's extremely valuable information, but it takes a long time. Even just getting these wild populations used to a researcher being present. And sometimes they never take to the researcher. Your whole project hinges on whether or not this troop is going to accept your presence. And sometimes they don't. You go out there for months and they just don't. And other times it does take months, weeks, months, and so forth, but eventually they get used to your presence and they relax around you. It can put them at risk, though. Because they are so closely related to us, they are also susceptible to many of the same diseases we are. but have very few natural immunities to them because we're bringing human diseases into these environments. So it does put them at risk in that respect. So there are a lot of protocols around maintaining your own health coming into the site, and having actual contact, physical contact, with the troop members. But your very presence there could signal to poachers the presence of these animals. And in some parts of Africa, not all, but in some parts of Africa, primates are part of the bushmeat trade. I should stress, the bushmeat trade is a very complicated topic. There's some extremely unethical aspects of it, some extremely dangerous aspects. In some places, there are connections to organized crime or terrorism. But in others, it's just local people trying to survive, too. So it's a very complicated process. Probably the role of primates being hunted in that process is not a great one under any circumstances, but it's a complicated subject. That said, and the last problem with this type of research is it's very difficult to observe even the most well-habituated animals. Sometimes, this is Jane Goodall here, she has reported individuals dying and them not knowing for weeks until they found a body. They just noticed they weren't around anymore. And it was so normal for sometimes individuals to disappear for weeks on end that you just never know. And some individuals disappeared and were never seen again, and they don't know what happened to them. Did they join another troop? Did they get injured? Were they poached? We don't know. We don't know. So it is probably the least controlled environment, and that presents some benefits and some drawbacks in terms of research. Now, I want to focus a little more on this because this form of research was pioneered by three incredible women in the 1960s and 1970s. Jane Goodall, Dian Fossey, and Birute Galdikas. Early primate studies, like I said before, even when they went to the field, just lasted for days or weeks. People didn't spend very much time. But these three women, working under the tutelage of Richard Leakey, who's a very famous physical anthropologist we'll hear more about when we start talking about Australopiths. But he really sort of, these three women developed methodologies kind of based on cultural anthropology's practice of participant observation, where you go and you spend long periods of time acculturating, getting used to the local culture. And that's really what they did. They went there, not only got the subject animals they were observing used to them, but they got used to the animals they were observing as well. Jane Goodall is famous for working with the chimps of Gombe. Dian Fossey is most notable for working with mountain gorillas, and was an intense advocate against poaching and the hunting of mountain gorillas. And Birute Galdikas worked with the last of the sort of great ape species that were known about at the time, the orangutans. There's one other great ape species, the bonobos, who are very closely related to chimpanzees that, but weren't very well studied at the time. So these three women really changed the field of primatology, and in ways that persist to this day. That is how we came to do primatology the way we do it today. This is how we get at primate behavior. And we have learned a great deal. In the next video, I'm going to go further into that, into this notion of sociality, which is a common feature in all primates that we share. That is really a key feature of the order of primates. It is key to our success. And we're going to ask why, because on the surface, sociality, the ability to sort of get along with others of your species in relatively large groups, is a sort of counterintuitive thing from a natural selection perspective. So we'll address that in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself, and I hope you are having a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.